Everyone has some sort of a closet that's become too small. A closet is no place to live, and I want to support as many people as I can in stepping out of that prison into the fullness of life that's waiting for them on the other side of that closet door. I'm Nancy Shadlock from Centered Life Coaching. Join me in listening to these Coming Out Chronicles. Get curious about your story, and then see what good things are waiting for you on the other side of your closet door.
Yeah, I see that mirroring as so important. And I think that's a lot of what drew me to reach out to you. You were speaking at a conference I was attending virtually
Right.
for the CGLCC. And I was so inspired by the way that you talked about all the goodness that opened up for you after you came out. And so I wondered if you could share that with us and be a mirror of like, better is possible. And this is what it looked like for me.
Sure. So I came out in 97, and like I said, I missed telling my sister, and so I'm not missing. So I made a vow to myself to not miss telling anybody else. But then I think you may relate to this, and maybe people on the podcast do. You get to a point where you're tired of telling anybody. You don't want to tell anybody anymore. You just want to be yourself, and so people figure it out or they don't. I mean, the fact that I had been out, so 97, and then I was with the company for a while, and in 99 I started my own company, and I never once at that point said LGBT owned. I don't even think certification existed at the time. If it did, it was so far away in Toronto that I didn't look for it. But it was never an issue. Like my clients, if they knew about it, they talked about it amongst themselves, but I never raised it and it never came up, and friends became friends, and you just build a network. And I struggled. It wasn't easy to build the business when we did, and I almost threw in the towel, but decided to keep going another year or two. And then things get easier because you get known and you do good work, and it builds on that. But I can tell you that I had my own process. Like I didn't go to prides for probably the first year after being out. Like I would go to the lake. It was just too wild, too wacky.
Yeah.
I mean, from a conservative rural boy growing up in Morinville to come to the city to then be thrown into even what was a modest, probably very basic pride in the early 90s. But then I decided, nope, I have to go do this. And I remember the first year that I went and just walked at the end of the march, so nobody could really see. And then fast forward 10 years, and I'm leading the march with the leader of the Liberal Party, who ends up being the Prime Minister. And I didn't expect the role of special advisor. In fact, somebody who is an Edmontonian, now lives in Toronto, Doug Kerr, he leads the Dignity Network, which is a bunch of Canadian NGOs that work with international LGBT-driven NGOs to make lives better for people around the world. He happened to be in Edmonton. He came to my constituency office, and he said, "We're having this international conference in June. Would you speak?" And I said, "What day?" I said, "No, it's like June 6th, 7th, 8th." And he was meeting with me in my office. It was April. I said, "Well, if we did something big and bold, could you like pause the conference and bring everybody to Parliament Hill?" He was like, "What do you have in mind?" I'm like, "I don't think we've ever raised the pride flag on Parliament Hill. And if we have, certainly the Prime Minister's never raised it." He's like, "Are you actually thinking of raising the pride flag during my international conference?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then I said something that you should never say as a rookie parliamentarian. Even as a seasoned parliamentarian, you should probably never say the words, "How hard could that be?" Turns out the lawn in front of Parliament is like a military compound. Like every square inch of that is managed or has to be approved by 5 different agencies, of which 2 of them are like paramilitary. Like one's the RCMP, the other's the protective services of the Hill, and then there's protocol. Anyway, turned out that Monday of that week, I didn't have a location, I didn't have a flag, I didn't have any support. By Tuesday, managed to get the Prime Minister's office involved. Still didn't know where it was going to be. Wednesday morning, I had assurances that we would have a flag, we'd have a flagpole, we'd have a great location, because we were doing this Wednesday afternoon. We'd put the flyers on all the desks, like people were coming. And at 4:00 on that day, we raised the pride flag for the first time in history, and it was the Prime Minister who raised it, and we had 400 people within 24 hours show up on the Hill. Tour buses stopped. Tour buses demanded that their drivers stop so they could come and take photos of that pride flag because they couldn't do it in their own country.
Wow.
And that flagpole stayed up there until 7:30, 8:00 before Public Works came and took it away. We didn't leave. We were there. We were helping people take photos. We took photos with them. People drove from Montreal. They drove from Toronto. They heard that this was happening, and then they went global. Like, people couldn't believe that Canada had just done this. And so that was something we did because we thought it was the right thing to do. It was a good way to mark Pride Month. And then I said, you know what? There are prides in my province that happen in September. So we got to stop with this Pride Month stuff. It's too Toronto specific. And so I said, it's called Pride season now. And it was like, oh, you're right. Because Whistler actually has their Pride in February. Jasper has their Pride in March. And now Ottawa has added to Winterlude with the Winter Pride. And so we actually talk about Pride season now. And so, look, it wasn't until, this would have been June of 2016. It wasn't until November that the Prime Minister called me and asked me if I would serve as a special advisor. And what do you do when the Prime Minister calls you and asks you to do something? You just say yes. But I was speechless, literally speechless. And I said, Prime Minister, I'm speechless. And he starts laughing, a full belly laugh. He says, oh, Randy, we both know that won't last very long. He said, but the community needs help. It needs a champion. It needs support. And I said, I'm happy to do this. Will there be resources? Because I'm not going to do this if it's just a figurehead and a title. He said, see, I told you you're becoming a good MP. You're asking the right questions. He said, there will be a secretariat. It'll be in the Privy Council office. You'll have staff. You'll have a team. And I need you to work with this community because we have more work to do. And that's what we did. We got busy. And then I didn't wait until the secretariat was set up. I started meeting with people around the country. And my first meeting took place in Winnipeg. And I met with Indigenous elders. I met with people of color. I met with the seniors group. I met with a whole bunch of trans activists and people just trying to find their way. And we created this safe space before the first roundtable. And 15 and 16-year-old gender non-binary people came, and this 74-year-old trans woman who had done her transition 30 years before was a person in the federal public service, said she had a great transition, a great career, wasn't really an activist while she was working, but now it was time. And at the end of the session, once they talked and shared their experience and what they'd hoped to see from the federal government, one of the gender non-binary people who used the name Kyle, they said, because I asked what the key learnings were, and they said, well, I didn't know that as trans people, non-binary people, we got to be so old. But then they said, and I didn't know how beautiful we are when we get that old.
Oh.
Whole room starts crying, right? But they lived in the same city and they had no way to meet.
Right.
That's when I realized there's a convening power, and there's just the simple fact of putting people in a room and making sure that everybody gets to use their voice. Mm-hmm. That is what is important. And fast forward 3 years later, I'm no longer the MP, and the minister comes to our city to make an announcement at Pride Center of Edmonton, and there's a Two-Spirit representative there. And she comes up to me before the session and she says, Elder Ed sent me. And he said, because Randy's there, it's a safe space. He says, he is the sharer of voices. I'm like, what does that mean? She goes, Ed has seen you and the elders have seen you. And every time you're moderating or coordinating a meeting, you make sure everybody has their voice heard. Mm. She said, so I'm here and I'm very scared, but I know you're going to help me share my voice. Hmm. That's what it's all about. I mean, we got to help people share their voices because there's way too many voices that have not been heard.
Yeah. Hear, hear. That's what this is all about.
Yeah, and it's great. I mean, the rise of podcasts, right? Who knew? Yeah. And I mean, just people download them and walk and go and listen and get inspired to maybe create their own way to share voices. I mean, and it'll be interesting with the timing, but I've been waiting to do my podcast. I've been waiting to do my Pride video because I'm going to do and I'm not in any hurry because it's Pride season, not Pride month. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to make a point of that in the video. But I'm also going to say that this is a reflective Pride. And this is a Pride where we need to, in some respects, stop talking and start acting about certain things and just move and make space for people. And so that's going to be an important part of it. But we have to keep each other accountable, and we have to keep each other honest. And we have to, we also have to realize that people are going to learn through this. I mean, I learned what I've learned, and there's still more learning to go, about the struggles and the challenge of trans people in my role as special advisor. And passing legislation to protect trans people in the criminal code and hate speech, and also in the Canadian Human Rights Commission legislation is critical. And I remember a reporter asking 12-year-old Charlie, who was one of our spokespeople, they were getting testy. The journalists were getting testy. Like, oh, this can't possibly make a difference. And one of the journalists actually shot a question right at Charlie and said, how can this legislation possibly make a difference in your life? And she went by the pronoun she, and she, 12 years old, Charlie, stares them right back in the face and said, stop right there. This legislation is going to make sure I can get an apartment. This legislation is going to make sure that they can't fire me from a job. This legislation is going to make sure that if you write something nasty, that I can go after you as a journalist. So this is going to save lives and make my life better. Wow. No more questions from the journalists about whether this was going to make a difference, because they had no idea, right? They'd never walked in, at least the journalists that were there didn't know the struggles and the challenges of somebody who's decided to transition. And so good for Charlie.
That's amazing. So without being a member of parliament anymore, I'm guessing that you're someone that just keeps growing and just keeps challenging himself. And in that progression, there's likely to be a whole nother coming out period for you. And so as you kind of lean into that, what would you say is your next coming out season?
So it's interesting because I put on a bunch of weight, and everybody jokes about the parliamentary weight. It's no joke. I mean, just getting back and forth to Ottawa, if you eat what they serve you on that plane, it's like all your day's calories in 3.5, 4 hours. So you shouldn't do that. And I did. And so there was a number in front of my weight on the scale that I didn't like. That number is now gone, but I'm down 15. I got another 10 to go. And that's a process. Like there's a whole introspection process. There's a whole, when you go back to eating well and fitness, there's a self-discovery there. What's happened though is I now have the freedom, and it's interesting because without COVID, I would literally be traveling the world working on different LGBT issues, invitations from different prides, the Equal Rights Coalition, which Canada and Chile were co-chairs of in 2017 to 2019. We passed now to the Brits and to the Argentines. They were supposed to have a big meeting at the end of May. I was going to be there. Everything was pushed till December. I suspect with COVID, it won't happen until April or May of 2021. That said, though, we are continuing to push on conversion therapy. I was part of the panel of experts convened by the United Nations, independent expert on SOGI matters, Victor Madrigal-Borlos, in Boston in March, just before everything shut down. And then he released his report. I continue to work with municipalities that want to pass legislation to ban conversion therapy. I'm at the disposal of the Minister of Justice and the Ministry of Justice as they get looking to set up their working group. It's hard with COVID, but I've been, on a few Zooms with LGBT chambers of commerce. Like we just did one last week with the Colombian Chamber of Commerce, and they had 120 businesses on there about how do they, and they're not necessarily LGBT-owned businesses. They're Colombian businesses that want to export and do work with Canada. And we're like, how can we do more to embrace diversity and inclusion? So that's very cool. I moderated a panel for the Conference Board of Canada on diversity and inclusion. And my message, as moderator, you can put some messages up there, is this recovery needs to be equitable. And every business owner listening on this podcast right now should think about how their business is diverse by design. It's the only way that happens. And there was a great line that somebody used on that panel. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is when somebody invites you to dance. So everybody listening to this podcast, when's the last time you asked somebody different from you to dance? Because that's what we all have to do. And I have a TEDx University of Alberta talk coming up, which was supposed to happen literally the day after we shut everything down in March. And but we just couldn't put 200 people in an auditorium when we didn't know what the virus was. And we knew less than we know now. And so my message there is we need champions. I love allies. I cultivate allies. I support and help and equip allies. But now we need to get from allyship to championship. And what I mean by that is an ally is somebody who's got my back when I'm in the room. But a champion is somebody who has my back when I'm not in the room. And we need more champions. Well, we need more champions, and we need people who are going to invite us in. And so that's an important element now. And I mean, I was reading books, and I took time away after the election and went to my happy place, which is in Buenos Aires. I spent a lot of time there learning tango and Spanish in the early 2000s. And it's been recently that I've been, happy enough and ready enough to start setting out new goals. And I thought, 3 or 4 would be good. 10. Okay, I have 10 goals. So we'll see. I mean, piano, being able to play 3 jazz piano songs is great. That was a more intense goal when it was cold and snowy outside. A little less so now that it feels like summer here. But it's good to have those goals. It's good to push. It's good to feel like a newbie in some respects. And so my consulting business has been revived, and we're also working on we've started a PPE company that's actually turned out to be able to support a bunch of the seniors facilities here in Edmonton. And so that's very rewarding to know that we're doing that piece to keep people safe. And then there are other goals in terms of continuing to fight for LGBT rights around the world. A former minister in David Cameron's government in the United Kingdom and his name is Nick Herbert, created the Global Equality Caucus. I had attended enough interparliamentary meetings and realized that there were LGBT people there, but we didn't have a forum. And we were kind of meeting on the margins, or we'd kind of try to get our issues. I mean, that's one way to do it, but the other way to do it is to bring together a group of LGBTQ2 elected people around the world. So at the national level, the provincial or state level, and the municipal level, and create a global caucus. And so we've called it the Global Equality Caucus. It launched in New York in 2019 at New York's World Pride. And it's growing. And it's about no discrimination. It's about no violence. Let's start at the no violence against LGBT people, because there's still way too many countries in the world where violence is a daily threat. We want people to have access to their medical needs, antiretrovirals if it's an HIV question, or support for transition if that's what's needed. And we need governments to collect better data on the community so that we can actually do proper, not just analysis of the data, but without the data, you can't actually make a case for policy changes or for funding to change. And then the fifth thing that we're pushing is for governments and corporations to do more to fund LGBTQ2 initiatives. And I think I can say that, part of being my full self was I was not giving up until we found $20 million over 2 years for the LGBTQ community here in Canada. And that's now grown to $50 million over 5 years. And we also managed to carve away $30 million over 5 years, and then $10 million a year ongoing for LGBTQ2 organizations here in Canada to do work around the world. And so we literally dislodged about $100 million in the last 6 months of my mandate, because I simply wouldn't take no for an answer. But we did it as a team, and we did it as allies, and we did it as friends and people who knew that the community needed this. And so, yeah, if Parliament never happens for me again, I can say, hey, we did, great things in a short amount of time. And that LGBTQ secretariat. And when you get things right, when you have leadership at the top, when you have support, when you have people that want to see good work getting done, you literally can move mountains, because there were some things that we were able to do and we managed to get done that I thought would take us 10 years or more. And we got it done in about 3. So who knows, maybe Parliament again. But for now, it's work on those 10 goals, enjoy some of the summer here, and do some traveling once it's safe to do that again. Amazing.
You are doing such great work in the world. Thank you for being 100% your whole self.
And there ain't no turn back now. And I've been talking with people who've already turned 50, and they say, oh, you're going to love it. 50s are the best decade. I'm like, well, bring it on. Let's see.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your stories with us today.
My pleasure. Have a great Pride season, and I look forward to chatting again soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Coming Out Chronicles. If you enjoyed it, give it a like. And if you think it would be helpful for someone else, please share it with them. If you'd like to connect with me, reach out on social. I'd love to support you on the next chapter of your coming out story. Until next time, this is Nancy Shadlock from Centered Life Coaching.